Hello, Lucy here. Are you a creative who's taken the road less travelled? Do you have a story that could inspire others? Well, I want to hear from you. Share your journey on the show and motivate our listeners to chase their dreams. Click the link in the show notes to register your interest or send me a message. And remember, if you are enjoying the show, then please head over to wherever you get your podcasts from and rate and review the show. Your feedback really matters. Thanks for listening. Stay wild. Hello and welcome to this week's episode of The Wilderness of Creativity. In this episode, we explore the fascinating intersections of creativity, communication and research. I'm thrilled to introduce a very special guest of mine, Abby Kinsella. Abby is a researcher, a storyteller, and an advocate for the role of creativity in linguistics. In this episode, we talk about her journey discovering linguistics, the importance of audience engagement, and the transformative power of storytelling in podcasts. We also discuss the exciting role of AI in language research and how creative approaches can unlock new potentials in understanding communication. I am so excited to share this conversation with you, and I could not be more proud of Abby and her achievements. So let's get to the episode.
So since leaving school, I have been pursuing linguistics, and discovering what linguistics was a kind of light bulb moment of, okay, so this is what I'm actually interested in, within all these other things that I think I'm interested about. Because I plow through, for example, a lot of fiction. I get through a lot of books. But if anyone comes up to me and says, what are you reading? What's going on? And I go, what's the plot? And I kind of go, the what? That way, the plot, the characters, the things that happen to the characters, the things they do, and I'm kind of like, oh, things happen in books, do they? That's news to me. Wild. But I can tell you about an extended metaphor about sparrows in chapter 4. So it was a light bulb moment of realizing that what I was actually interested in was the language itself and the construction and the creativity of language and stuff like that. So once I discovered what linguistics was, I put that magical word into UCAS and found every university course I possibly could and narrowed it down to 5, as one has to. So I turned up at the University of Birmingham on that first day, and that first open day, the first person I encountered was a gentleman called Bodo Winter. And anyone who knows anything about linguistics, you might be listening, has just fallen to the floor in jealousy and is writhing around on the ground and sort of tearing chunks out of their own arms, because Bodo Winter is currently revolutionizing about 7 different subfields of linguistics single-handedly, while also attending electronica raves, if the rumours are to be believed. And I challenge, nay dare, anyone to look at any of Bodo's stuff. He's got a couple of lectures on YouTube, and not come away absolutely chomping at the bit to find out more about this stuff. So yeah, it was partly right place, right time, and having Bodo in that building. But yeah, from then I was sold 110%. But every time, every time I think about linguistics, I think about language, the thing I keep coming back to is, my God, aren't people clever? It is just a constant epiphany of human beings are given these limited resources of our vocal tracts or our hands, depending on the modality of the language that we're using. And we are able to combine and revolutionize things that are coming out of our mouths or out of our hands every moment. And it's just, I think language is such an amazing window into how brilliant human beings are and what we can do with the limited stuff we have. Oh, it's great.
Oh no, it is. And I always feel like I have so much to say but don't always have the right words. And I think there's a lot of people out there that would feel the same way. When you think about how children learn language, it's fascinating.
It is fascinating.
See, I'm already going off piste.
It's all right. I think I want to kind of springboard off something you said at the start of that.
Mm-hmm.
I think there are a lot of misconceptions about linguistics as a field. Like my university course included gesture studies, for example. So there are so many things that you don't think about feeding into linguistic expression. And so many things that we can actually study. Like, you don't think of gesture as something that you can put into little boxes, but it's just such a remarkable field for being able to explore every aspect of human life. And the wow moments can be quite mundane and quite small, and moments where you just go, wow, we do that. Oh yeah. It's those, because those things kind of foster a connection if you're in that lecture hall and you go, I do that. And your mate goes, I do that as well. And you go, oh yeah, we are a community of language users. Isn't that amazing? And it always gets people talking.
And in drama, in theatre, we are analysing, interpreting body language, gestures, tone of voice, all of those things all the time, and manipulating them when we're creating characters, exploring emotion, relationships. So actually what you did study at GCSE has fed into what you're doing now. It's
absolutely,
it's the bedrock.
It is, and I am so grateful to you.
I wasn't fishing, I promise. But it's, it's
fish away. You deserve it.
I find it. I'm so proud of what we do in the drama room, because it is so much part of what it is to be human. So it's incredible to now listen to you talking so eloquently about these things that are inspiring you and that you want to explore more. I mean, what are you trying to achieve?
So I've I've not fallen into a research area, but I have arrived at, again, another light bulb moment of, okay, what do I actually want to do with all this stuff that I find interesting on just a theoretical level? I find it interesting for the sake of finding it interesting, but where do I want to take that? And that's when I sort of discovered the distinction between theoretical linguistics and applied linguistics.
Okay, please explain to me.
Here we go. So obviously there is so much overlap. They are not, monolithic things. They do not exist in a bubble. But theoretical linguistics is more along the lines of working out what different parts of language do in different languages. So working out how a verb behaves in X language, working out what structures rather are grammatical in different languages, what works, what doesn't. And also more cognitive things, so how language works in the brain, where it lives in the brain, things along that side. Applied linguistics is more so doing things. It's quite self-explanatory, really, if you think about it. It's doing things that have real world implications. So, for example, an applied linguist may want to study NHS documents, for example. They might have a look at the language of NHS documents, and they might do perhaps a discourse analysis, which is where you analyze the discourse, and they might identify some features, and then they might gain intuitions, or they might go out and talk to people and say, okay, is this language working for you? Is this language operating in a way that is allowing it to achieve its goal of helping you out in a healthcare context? And they might get the response of, No, it isn't. I ain't got a clue what that says. So if they do that, they can perhaps go away and collaborate with people in order to get the information across in the way that is the most helpful for the users. So yeah, I arrived at Applied Linguistics because I found myself in a wonderful, wonderful, vibrant community of academics who were committed to open science. So getting rid of the paywalls and, getting their papers out to the wider public. So you can just click on another. But having studied in, an academic context, applied linguistics, that got me thinking, all right, open science is all well and good. You can open the doors.
Yeah.
But what if you can't read them?
So
Are
true.
scientific papers any good if it's not in a form that people aren't going to be able to use, or people don't understand? Yeah, so if we say, like, for argument's sake, you're a normal layperson and you want to access science in order to work out what to feed your cat. If that's what you want with the science communication, is it any good to you, really, to know about molecular bonding? Is it any good for the cat if we're thinking about the true user? Even on a more macro scale than that, is it any good for a cat to have a methodology section? Is the cat going to do a replication study? I don't think it is. So there is a definite need to return to the user and think about what are people actually going to want and need in their communication if they are going to use it in their everyday lives.
Just listening to you talk about communication and ensuring that there's equity. People have power. They are empowered with the information to make change in their lives, to access something. It's so important because there's a huge gap, isn't there, between those who can and those who struggle to grasp concepts. And that can leave people feeling left out and on the fringes of a group of people.
Yeah. And if one finds themselves on the fringes, what do? They react. Knowledge is power is a very simplified sentiment that works.
Tell me about this. Can you talk about the potential of the PhD?
The PhD is actually in something different. My master's is complete and it is my own, so I can I can speak about it. So my entire master's degree is a 40,000 word research thesis.
And is that about podcasting?
That is the podcasting one. Yes, that is the podcasting one.
What did you write in 40,000 words? I mean, I can't even write an email.
I'll show you. I'll heft it up. I've got my tome here because I can't actually remember what it's called. There it is. There she is.
Brilliant. Wow. Abby, congratulations.
Oh, thank you.
Honestly, well done.
It was great fun. So I can't even complain. I had the time of my life. Anyway, my thesis is entitled Audience Engagement Strategies in a Science Popularization Podcast with a Focus on Meta Discourse. So
what does that actually mean?
What I shall do is I shall take you on the journey.
Please
on a journey of its conception. So I was on about my thoughts about needing to return to the user in terms of what they might actually need if they're consuming scientific content that they might not necessarily be particularly familiar with. And I came upon this term academic gatekeeping, coined by a researcher called Figuera. And this researcher lists things like complex vocabulary, non-chronological structures, so putting things out of order, and difficult to follow argument forms, so ways of getting from A to B linguistically that just don't make any sense unless you've been trained to recognize what they're trying to say, as psychological barriers to accessing information. So yeah, so I returned to kind of what might a user actually need, and I came upon kind of two overarching things that in the literature seemed to be things that people needed attending to, and those were acknowledgement, so being acknowledged throughout the text, being helped along, having their hand held a little bit, being guided through, saying, now we're going to talk about this, this is how this fits into this, and also work to make them interested, because there are swathes and swathes of studies, and it just works it's obvious people are going to consume things more readily if they are actually interested in what they are going to say. So things like signposts to the language being relevant, saying, and this is important because this is exciting because and I started thinking about the media that I consume, and I love a podcast. And I thought about, why do I love podcasts? Well, the conversational tone allows for different uses of vocabulary. So even while I've been talking just now, I've parsed things as I've gone along. I've said complex vocabulary, which means using blah, 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 these types of words. You can break away from the kind of academic language that might be being used just by the very nature of the tone of a podcast itself. You can consume a podcast passively, so it doesn't feel like an intimidating sit-down kind of task. You can be cooking your dinner, you can be walking the dog, whatever. Now, I've scribbled this one down. I find this a little bit contentious.
Okay, go on.
I don't know. Some people reckon that audio-only formats are better for visualizing new information because without a visual cue, you can use images that are already stored in your head in order to make the information work for you. So we'll go back to cat nutrition, because apparently that's what I'm going for. If you're learning about cat nutrition and you don't have a diagram in front of you, you can imagine your own cat. And that's an image that you don't have to kind of build up from scratch. I'm not sure about that, but it sounds it looks good on page 27 of my thesis.
And why does that not seem to sit right with you?
I've read a lot of papers advocating or arguing for visuals being the dominant sense in processing, and also in the context of language that appears to be borne out because we have a lot more verbs about the visual modality than any others. So I think you may have said it in this podcast. You referring to me saying something, not something visual. You have said I see to indicate that you have understood what I'm doing. That is a visual verb. So I don't know. I think that on some level, visual cues are likely to be more helpful than hindering, let's say. So I'm not sure that it can entirely track that lack of visual input can be superior. It just may not be inferior.
Yeah.
For example.
No, I understand. And the thing is as well is that it's only recently that I've started to include video clips on the Wilderness of Creativity podcast and linking that to a YouTube channel, which is purely there's the shorts that I have, but also the podcast which people can listen to on YouTube as well. And it's being able to see me and to see the guest having these
Mhm.
conversations has boosted listeners, it's boosted views. So is there something in there about being able, oh, it's about connection, isn't it? And
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know if I'm misunderstanding here, but with my questioning, I will go off piste because I'm reading people's body language and I'm picking up on things that you're doing with your eyebrows and, you're with your head. And so I'm like, okay. And the energy there is so important.
One of the little sub chapters I had in my lit review is about community building in podcast in podcasting. That's another well, loose bullet point of kind of why I landed on podcasts as a thing to do, because that people tend to build communities around podcasts. It's a thing people do. They get the WhatsApp group going and they and they discuss the ideas, and it is a very community building kind of enterprise. And but yeah, there is a section about called creating a listener community. And that's just I thought it was important to acknowledge the bits at the end where they say, you can contact us on these platforms and you can talk to us about our research and you can correct us if you think we're wrong, all that sort of stuff, because I think that's another important thing about perhaps science popularization as contrasted with science communication. One of the strategies I found in the data was that people were, the hosts rather, were admitting their non-expert status. They were using phrases like, as far as I understood it, or as far as I can find in my research, which is a valuable thing to do because it doesn't make the world of science communication a kind of prestige community that can only be accessed by certain types of people. And yeah, it's a pet peeve of mine when people don't admit that there are people that know more about something than them. Partly because it just strikes me as incredibly arrogant. I was like, how can you be that arrogant? But also because it's inefficient. From a research perspective, why should I sit here trying to understand a discipline that I haven't been trained in, when there's a bloke over there who's been studying it for 20 years? And if I just kind of, lift my head up and admit, I don't know what this means, can you help me out with this? I just think there is so much potential for rich collaboration between disciplines that can potentially be stunted by arrogance or by thinking that one discipline is more important than the other and things like that. I would say that it is my view that creativity is neither a luxury nor a necessity. I think it is an inevitability. My constant epiphany when studying language is that human beings are incredible and clever and creative. And I think that the fact that we speak at all and that we are able to put together these limited resources and express ourselves and form connections and create art is testament to that creativity is something within human beings. It is just something that is going to happen if you allow it to, or in spite of if you allow it to, I suppose, because the ways that we interact with the world are creative because it is taking the building blocks of our environment and rearranging them until they are born out in what we do and what we say. One of the questions you asked was, what advice would you give to kind of educators that might want to implement creative strategies? And thinking about what you just said, that my conclusion was going to be that the textual examples that I have in front of me so maybe I'll actually talk about those in a minute. But yeah, they're not they're not War and Peace as applied to cell division. They're not great creative epics that have taken, any sort of writerly merit to produce. They tend to be like opportunistic pockets of creativity that quite naturally exemplify what is being said. And I think that, like, my kind of conclusion in all that is that creativity is something so integral to how we live our lives as human beings that it creates its own opportunities. It doesn't necessarily need to be a conscious, okay, I'm going to make some creative learning resources. It can be that, and it's brilliant if it is that. But I think a lot of creating or harnessing creativity when getting ideas across is just looking for the opportunities and allowing them to grow when they pop up.
Yes, I absolutely can speak to that, because as I have gained more experience, I would say that I am much more in tune with those opportunities and listening to those little whispers of inspiration more so now. And they come in more often as well. So I will be going into a lesson and I will see something, a prop or whatever it is, and I'll go, oh, an idea will come. And then, just as you were saying, allowing that idea to grow and not stopping myself from going, oh, but I need to make sure I have my learning objective first before I go into this lesson. No, no, you don't. You just go, oh, yes, look at this. What can we do with this? What do you see? What do you like? What do you did? And it's, I think so often in education we get stuck because we're so fixated on the learning objective, the context, the outcome, and we just need a little bit more freedom, I think, to explore those opportunities. And so often the students will be way ahead of where we are in a lesson and what they want to explore. So it's giving that trust and that ownership to the students in the lesson as well, I think.
People emerge, creativity emerges, perspectives emerge authentically if you allow them to. And I think there's a lot to be said about perhaps in education harnessing things that arrive authentically. Because we, on some level, traditional education is valuable, but everyone who's thought about it for more than 10 seconds says, what is the point of ascribing a child's worth on a number? How can you possibly encapsulate who that person is via a number?
Yeah.
Which you start to realize rather quickly is only valuable until you get to the next step. So as soon as you've got something, you're like, what have I done with my GCSE food?
You were talking a little bit there about the elements of your research, and I've picked out sort of the storytelling element of podcasts and how that can play such an important part in engaging the listeners. What are your thoughts on that?
So this is the bit where I started properly looking. So what I had was I had a corpus of podcast data, and what a corpus is it is basically a great big computerized set of data. And so this time around, it was just loads and loads and loads of podcast transcripts of a science popularization podcast. And what you can do in corpus linguistics, which is the best type of linguistics, is that you can use the computer to, in an automated way, tell you lots and lots of interesting things. So, for example, the first thing you might do if you get a corpus is you can type in a word and hit search, and it tells you how many times that comes up. Brilliant. But the more lucrative thing is that if you have a specific corpus, so I have my podcast data, you can do a thing called keyword analysis. So you can type in that same word and the computer will bring up how many times it appears in your corpus, but also how many times it appears relative to another corpus. So you can have a corpus of general language use, basically. There's a thing called the BNC, the British National Corpus, which is just a multi-billion word corpus of normal language use. So you can say that in this particular language variety that I have selected my special little corpus to represent, this word comes up more often. And that can be very, very useful in things like political discourse, because you can type in a word, for example, like immigrants, and it will bring up the word immigrants appears a lot more frequently in this variety of language to this general use of language. And then once you have that, you can also do a thing called colloquy analysis. And colloquies are two words that are friends. So if you, I'm just going to use the immigrants example because I've looked at it a lot and it is unfortunately very pervasive. You might see the word illegal coupled with immigrants quite often. And then, or you might not, which would be another thing to study, because you might have two further specialist corpora, one from a particular side of the political spectrum, one from another. And you can say, this side of the spectrum couples illegal with immigrants more often than this side does. And you could do lots of different comparisons with that. Now, there is a bit of a misconception about corpus linguistics, that it is purely numbers based and that it's all about doing these frequency counts and it's all about that. But you can also do lots of brilliant work with looking at things in context, because you can do a thing called concordance line analysis, which is where you go to the data that you have found and you can open it up and you can see the thing in context. And that is useful because it can tell you lots of things that you might have been misled by the raw counts. Because, for example, you may type in a word perhaps that has been used as a hate symbol and find it highly represented in your corpus. However, if you go in, you might find it used in the context of, this idiot's got this word in his bio, isn't he stupid? Kind of thing. So it may be offering the opposite sentiment to what it might seem from the raw frequency count.
But why is understanding that data and enabling, as you would say, like in your email, lay people understanding why that data and that context is so important, how that can really shift mindset?
Yeah, I think you kind of hit the nail on the head immediately by saying the way that the world is now. Because from if we're looking at this quite clinically, corpus linguistics is useful to use from a research dissemination perspective, because it's starting to be that papers are not accepted unless there are some sort of hard data points. If there are not some great, people talk about a thing called ecological validity, which is how applicable is this to how many domains across society. So the bigger you can make your data and the more rigorous you can make the numbers you put behind it, the more likely it is to be disseminated beyond, your immediate sphere. So we are heading towards a kind of data revolution. But I would say the corpus linguistics can only succeed, I think, in the long term if we keep the qualitative analysis and we keep the human eyes opening up the data. For example, my first little job that I had at university as a research assistant was working, and people are going to writhe on the floor in jealousy again, because it was Bodo's project. I had the pleasure and honor of working on a project with Bodo that was it was called Making Numbers Meaningful, and it was a corpus project intending to disambiguate uses of numerical language. It was originally in the context of COVID, So when there were lots of baffling sort of numbers-based statistics being fired at us with those graphs that didn't make much sense, and yes, it was looking at those and looking and investigating language. So we had a great big, exactly as I described, we had our specialist corpus and we had a great big reference corpus that we were looking at this stuff in. And we were using lots of search terms that were numerical verbs. So like increases, grows, declines, verbs like that. It was my job to go into these bits of language that had been picked out and manually remove senses such as we grew mushrooms. Things like that. Just words that had nothing to do with what we were looking at, but the computer didn't know that there are two different senses of the verb to grow. So had the human eyes not been there, we may have had wildly skewing data if the computer had mined, a farming magazine or something. And so it wasn't talking about, financial growth, it was talking about crops or whatever. We need human eyes in research to remain human eyes.
Okay, so now that leads on to the role of AI.
It does.
And where that is going to go and lead us.
I hope that data-driven approaches can remain a balance between automation and humanity. I am hopeful that it can. And that's all I'm going to say, I suppose.
I think that's all you can say.
Yeah, it's one of those where I don't want to say I don't like thinking about it too much, but this is what I was talking about, actually. It's one of those things that I accept that I am not the person to speak on this because I am not a computer scientist. I am a linguist who harnesses computerized data sometimes. And I would need to do a lot of research to gain any sort of standing in the debate about where AI can go. However, from being on the ground and doing linguistics research, I do not, with my current understanding, see how AI can take over from the human.
Oh, that's all we need to know.
It'll be the authority on that.
In Abby we trust.
In Abby we trust. Don't trust in Abby.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode. If you enjoyed it, then please do take a moment to leave us a review and rate the show. Don't forget to follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and check out our YouTube channel for more updates and behind the scenes content. See you in the next episode. Stay wild.